The clock on the dashboard showed 2:15 a.m. as David pulled his luxury car into the circular driveway of his mansion. The house stood like a sleeping giant against the dark sky, with only a few security lights casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. He rubbed his tired eyes and loosened his expensive tie. Another late night, another business dinner that had stretched way past midnight. David owned one of the most successful investment firms in the city. His days started before sunrise and often ended well after sunset. Tonight had been particularly exhausting. He'd been trying to close a major deal with some international clients, and the negotiations had gone on for hours over expensive wine and fancy food at the city's most exclusive restaurant. As he stepped out of his car, the cool night air hit his face. The house was completely silent, just the way he expected it to be at this hour. His wife and daughter would be fast asleep, and the house staff had probably finished their work hours ago. He grabbed his briefcase from the passenger seat and walked slowly toward the front entrance, his leather shoes clicking softly on the stone pathway. David fumbled with his keys for a moment before finding the right one. The heavy wooden door opened with barely a whisper. He had spent a fortune on this house, making sure everything was perfect, including doors that wouldn't wake anyone when he came home late from work. He stepped inside and immediately felt the familiar warmth of his home surrounding him. But something was different tonight. Usually, when David came home this late, the house felt completely empty and peaceful. Tonight, there was something in the air that made him pause. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but his instincts told him something wasn't quite right. The house felt too awake, too alive for this time of night. He was about to head straight to his study to put down his briefcase when he heard soft footsteps coming from the direction of the kitchen. David froze. Who could possibly be awake at this hour? His first thought was that maybe there was an intruder in the house, and his heart started beating faster. Then, from the shadows of the hallway, a familiar figure appeared. It was Grace, the family's housekeeper who had been working for them for over 15 years. But something was strange about seeing her at this hour. Grace was usually gone by early evening, and David couldn't remember a single time when she had stayed this late. What made the situation even more unusual was the way Grace looked. She was still fully dressed in her work clothes, not the casual outfit she usually wore when she was getting ready to leave. Her face looked tired, but there was something else in her expression that David couldn't quite read. It looked like worry, or maybe even fear. Grace walked toward him with quick, quiet steps. When she got close enough, she did something that completely shocked David. Instead of greeting him with her usual polite smile and asking about his day, she looked directly into his eyes and spoke in a firm, urgent whisper. "Mr. David, please be quiet and follow me to the kitchen right now." David stood there with his mouth slightly open, not sure if he had heard correctly. In all the years Grace had worked for his family, she had never spoken to him like this. She had always been respectful, polite, and careful to maintain the proper distance between employer and employee. She would say things like, "Good evening, sir," or "How was your day, Mr. David?" But tonight she was giving him orders. His first reaction was confusion, followed quickly by a flash of annoyance. This was his house, his home that he paid for with his hard work. He was tired, stressed from the long day, and the last thing he wanted was to be told what to do by his employee, no matter how much he respected Grace as a person. David was about to ask Grace what was going on and why she was still in his house at this hour. But something in her eyes stopped him. There was an urgency there that he had never seen before. Grace wasn't being disrespectful or trying to overstep her boundaries. She looked genuinely worried about something, and that worry seemed to be connected to why she needed him to be quiet. He looked around the house, trying to figure out what could possibly require this level of secrecy and silence. Everything looked normal. The expensive paintings on the walls were in their usual places. The furniture was arranged exactly as it always was, and there were no signs of any problems or emergencies. But Grace was still standing there, waiting for him to follow her instructions. Her hands were clasped together in front of her, and David could see that she was nervous about something. This was the same woman who had helped raise his daughter, who had cooked thousands of meals for his family, who had kept his house running smoothly for years. If Grace was this worried about something, then maybe he should listen to her. David nodded slowly and followed Grace as she turned and walked quietly toward the kitchen. As they moved through the house, he noticed that Grace was being extra careful to avoid making any noise. She stepped lightly on the wooden floors and avoided the spots that usually creaked when people walked on them. The kitchen was dimly lit by a small lamp on the counter, creating a warm, yellow glow that made the large room feel smaller and more intimate. Grace gestured for David to sit at the kitchen table, the same table where his family ate breakfast every morning, though David realized he couldn't remember the last time he had actually joined them for that meal. As he sat down, David looked at Grace more carefully. She looked exhausted, like she had been awake for a very long time. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her usually neat appearance seemed a bit disheveled. Her hands were shaking slightly as she moved around the kitchen, and David began to realize that whatever had kept Grace in his house this late was something serious. Grace poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that was still warm, suggesting she had been drinking coffee to stay awake. She placed 1 cup in front of David and sat down across from him at the table. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of something important that hadn't been said yet. David wrapped his hands around the warm coffee cup and waited. He had learned over the years that Grace was not someone who wasted words or created drama unnecessarily. If she had something to tell him, it was probably something he needed to hear, even if he might not want to hear it. The kitchen clock ticked quietly on the wall, marking the seconds as they passed. David could hear the distant sound of the refrigerator humming and the occasional creak of the house settling around them. These were the sounds of his home, sounds he rarely had time to notice during his busy days and late nights. Looking at Grace sitting across from him, David suddenly realized how little he actually knew about what went on in his own house during the many hours when he was away at work. Grace had been taking care of his family for years, but he had never really stopped to think about what that actually meant or what she might have observed during all that time. Tonight felt different from any other night in David's recent memory. Something important was about to happen in his kitchen, in his house, with this woman who had been quietly taking care of his family while he was busy building his business empire. He took a sip of his coffee and prepared himself to listen to whatever Grace needed to tell him. The wealthy businessman who was used to controlling every conversation and making all the decisions was about to learn something that would change everything he thought he knew about his own life. Grace took a deep breath and looked directly at David. Her hands were trembling slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. David could see that whatever she was about to tell him was weighing heavily on her mind. The silence in the kitchen felt thick and heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. "Mr. David," Grace began, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you about your wife." David's stomach dropped. The way Grace said those words made his blood run cold. He set down his coffee cup with shaking hands and leaned forward in his chair. "What about my wife? What's wrong?" Grace closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength for what she was about to say. When she opened them again, David could see tears forming. "She collapsed tonight around 8 o'clock. I called the ambulance and they took her to Memorial Hospital." The words hit David like a physical blow. He felt all the air leave his lungs at once. "She what? Why didn't anyone call me? Why didn't you call me immediately?" "I tried," Grace said quickly. "I called your office, but they said you were in an important meeting and couldn't be disturbed. I left 3 messages. I tried your cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail." David reached for his phone with trembling hands. He had turned it off during the business dinner because he didn't want any interruptions during the negotiations. When he turned it back on now, he saw the missed calls and text messages from Grace, from the hospital, from numbers he didn't recognize. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. "Is she okay? What happened? What's wrong with her?" The questions tumbled out of his mouth one after another. Grace wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "The doctor said she's stable now. But David, there's more you need to know. Your wife has been sick for months, really sick." David stared at Grace, not understanding. "What do you mean she's been sick for months? She never told me she was sick. I would have known if my own wife was seriously ill." The look Grace gave him was gentle but heartbreaking. "Mr. David, she's been trying to hide it from you. She didn't want you to worry while you were working on that big business deal. She made me promise not to tell you." David felt like the world was spinning around him. "Hide what from me? What kind of sick?" Grace took another deep breath. "She's been having severe headaches, dizziness, fainting spells. Last month, she fainted at the grocery store. The week before that, she collapsed in the garden while she was planting flowers. I've been the one taking her to doctor appointments because she was too weak to drive herself." Each word felt like a dagger in David's heart. "Doctor appointments? What did the doctor say?" "They've been running tests for weeks. Blood tests, brain scans, heart tests. Your wife has been so scared, Mr. David. She's been trying to act normal, around you, but I could see how much she was suffering." David put his head in his hands. How could he have missed this? How could his own wife be seriously ill and he didn't even notice? Why didn't she tell me? Why would she hide something like this? Grace's voice was soft but honest. "Because you've been working 18-hour days for the past 6 months. Because when you do come home, you're either on the phone or working on your laptop. Because the last time she tried to talk to you about feeling tired, you told her maybe she should join a gym." The memory hit David like a slap. He remembered that conversation. It was about 2 months ago. His wife had mentioned feeling exhausted, and he had barely looked up from his computer screen when he suggested she might need more exercise. He had thought he was being helpful. He never imagined she was trying to tell him something was seriously wrong. "Where's our daughter?" David asked suddenly, realizing he hadn't seen or heard from her. "She's upstairs sleeping finally. It took me 3 hours to calm her down after the ambulance left. She was so scared, David. She kept asking where her daddy was and why he wasn't there when Mommy got sick." David felt sick to his stomach. His little girl had watched her mother collapse and be taken away in an ambulance, and he wasn't there. He was sitting in an expensive restaurant talking about profit margins and investment strategies while his family was falling apart. "She asked me if Mommy was going to die," Grace continued, her voice breaking. I didn't know what to tell her. A 7-year-old shouldn't have to worry about things like that. The guilt hit David so hard he could barely breathe. I need to go to the hospital right now. I need to see my wife. Grace nodded. I know you do, but there's more you need to understand. First, David looked at her, not sure how much more bad news he could handle in one night. Your wife has been protecting you from more than just her illness. She's been handling everything at home by herself for months. The school conferences, the parent meetings, helping with homework, dealing with problems around the house. She's been exhausted not just from being sick, but from trying to be both mother and father to your daughter. David felt like he was seeing his life clearly for the first time in months. What kind of husband am I? What kind of father? You're not a bad man, Mr. David, Grace said gently. You work hard to provide for your family. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that your family needs you, not just your money. Grace stood up and walked to the kitchen counter. She picked up a small notebook and brought it back to the table. Your wife asked me to keep track of things she wanted to tell you about. Things about your daughter's life that she hoped you'd have time to hear about someday. She opened the notebook and David could see pages and pages of his wife's handwriting. Grace began to read some of the entries. October 15th. Told a story at school about her daddy being a superhero businessman. Teacher said she seemed proud, but sad. November 2nd. Asked why daddy doesn't eat dinner with us anymore. November 20th. Drew a picture of our family at Thanksgiving. But Daddy wasn't in the picture because she said he's always working. Each entry felt like a knife twisting in David's heart. His daughter had been living her life, growing up, learning new things, and he had missed all of it. He had been so focused on building his business empire that he had forgotten to be present for the people he was supposedly doing it all for. December 1st, Grace continued reading, had a nightmare and asked for Daddy, but he wasn't home yet. December 10th, school play auditions, wanted Daddy to help her practice lines, but he was on a business call. December 15th, made Daddy a Christmas card at school, but teacher said she looked sad when she was making it. David couldn't take any more. Stop. Please stop. Grace closed the notebook gently. Your wife kept this because she loves you. She wanted to remember all the things to tell you when you had time to listen. She never stopped believing that someday you'd have time for your family again. David realized that his wife had been drowning, and instead of throwing her a life preserver, he had been so busy building bigger and bigger boats for his business that he never noticed she was struggling to stay afloat. The reason I asked you to be quiet when you came in, Grace said, is because your daughter finally cried herself to sleep about an hour ago. She's been asking for you all evening. She doesn't understand why you weren't here when something so scary happened to her mother. David looked toward the staircase, imagining his little girl upstairs, probably having nightmares about losing her mother, wondering where her father was when she needed him most. I failed them, David whispered. I completely failed my family. Grace reached across the table and touched his hand gently. It's not too late, Mr. David. Your wife is going to be okay. The doctors think they know what's wrong, and it's treatable. But your family needs you now more than they've ever needed you before. David looked at this woman who had been more present for his family's crisis than he had been. Grace had stayed up all night, comforted his daughter, dealt with the emergency, and now she was gently helping him understand how badly he had let his family down. Thank you, he said quietly. Thank you for being here when I wasn't. Grace smiled, sadly. That's what family does, Mr. David, And like it or not, after 15 years, we're all family here. David sat in the quiet kitchen, staring at his hands wrapped around the coffee cup that had gone cold. The weight of everything Grace had told him felt like a mountain pressing down on his chest. His wife was in the hospital. His daughter was upstairs, sleeping after hours of crying, and he had been completely oblivious to all of it. The successful businessman who prided himself on knowing every detail of his company's operations had missed the most important crisis happening right in his own home. Grace refilled his coffee cup without saying anything. She had been watching him process the information for several minutes, giving him time to absorb the reality of what his family had been going through. The kitchen clock continued its steady ticking, marking the passage of time in a night that felt like it would never end. "Grace," David finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "tell me everything. I need to know what I've missed. I need to understand how blind I've been." Grace settled back into her chair across from him. She looked tired, but there was something in her expression that told David she had been waiting for this conversation for a long time. "Where do I start?" Grace said softly. "Do I tell you about the morning last month when your wife couldn't get out of bed because she was so dizzy? How I had to help her to the bathroom and make breakfast for your daughter because she was too weak to stand up for more than a few minutes?" David winced, imagining his wife struggling while he was probably already at the office, checking emails, and preparing for meetings. "Or should I tell you about the time your daughter fell off her bike and scraped her knee really badly? Your wife was having one of her bad days, so I'm the one who cleaned the wound and put on the bandages. Your little girl kept asking when Daddy would come home to see her injury, but you didn't get home until after she was asleep." Each story felt like another weight being added to David's shoulders. "Why didn't you call me? Why didn't someone make me understand how serious things were?" Grace's expression grew gentle but firm. "Mr. David, we tried. Your wife tried so many times to talk to you about how she was feeling. But every time she brought it up, you had an excuse. You were closing a deal, or you had an important call, or you were preparing for a presentation." David remembered some of those conversations now, conversations he had dismissed or cut short because his mind was always on work. His wife had tried to tell him she wasn't feeling well, but he had been too distracted to really hear what she was saying. "2 weeks ago," Grace continued, "your wife had to leave your daughter's school play early because she started feeling faint. I picked up your daughter afterwards, and she was so disappointed. She had been looking forward to both her parents watching her perform." "She was in a school play?" David asked, his heart sinking even further. "She played a tree in the environmental awareness show. She practiced her lines every day for weeks. She kept asking if Daddy would be able to come watch her, and your wife kept promising that you would try. But you were in meetings all that day." David put his head in his hands. He couldn't even remember his daughter mentioning a school play. How had he become so disconnected from his own family that he didn't even know about the important events in his daughter's life? "Tell me about my daughter," David said quietly. "Tell me what she's been going through." Grace's expression softened. "She's a strong little girl just like her mother, but she's been confused and hurt. She doesn't understand why her daddy is never around anymore. She started asking me questions that break my heart." "What kind of questions?" "She asked me if you still love her and her mommy. She wanted to know if she did something wrong that made you not want to spend time with them. Last week she asked me if you were going to move away and live somewhere else." David felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. His little girl, his precious daughter, thought he might leave. The family. She was questioning whether her own father loved her. "She's been trying so hard to get your attention. Grace continued. She draws you pictures and leaves them on your desk, but you never mention them. She waits up past her bedtime, hoping to see you when you get home, but you usually come home after she's already fallen asleep. David thought about all the times he had found his daughter's drawings on his desk. He had always assumed his wife had put them there, and he had usually just moved them aside to make room for his work papers. He never realized his daughter had made them specifically for him, hoping for his attention and approval. 3 days ago, Grace said, she asked me to help her write you a letter. She wanted to invite you to have breakfast with her on Saturday morning. She said she would get up early and help me make pancakes. Your favorite kind. She wrote me a letter? David asked, feeling his heart breaking all over again. Grace nodded and reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out a small piece of paper, covered in a child's careful handwriting and crayon drawings. She asked me to give this to you when you had time to read it. David took the letter with trembling hands. At the top, his daughter had drawn a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands, a man in a suit, a woman with long hair, and a small girl with pigtails. Above the drawing, she had written "My Family" in colorful letters. The letter said, Dear Daddy, I miss you. Mommy says you work very hard to take care of us, and that's why you're not home very much. I want to have breakfast with you on Saturday. I can make pancakes and we can talk about school and my friends. I love you very much. Please come home early. Love, your daughter. David read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. His daughter's innocent words were full of love and hope, but also a sadness that no child should have to feel. She was asking for something so simple, just breakfast with her father, but even that had seemed impossible in his busy life. She wrote this 3 days ago? David asked. Yes. And she's been asking me every day since then if I gave it to you yet. I kept telling her I was waiting for the right time when you wouldn't be too busy to read it properly. David folded the letter carefully and put it in his shirt pocket, close to his heart. Grace, how did I become this person? How did I become the kind of father who is too busy to have breakfast with his own daughter? Grace leaned forward and looked directly into his eyes. You became successful, Mr. David, very successful. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that success isn't just about making money. Real success is about being there for the people who matter most. I thought I was doing the right thing, David said, his voice breaking. I thought if I could build the business bigger and bigger, I could give my family everything they wanted. I thought providing for them financially was the same as taking care of them. Your family doesn't need more money, Mr. David. Your wife drives a car that costs more than most people make in a year. Your daughter has toys and clothes that she doesn't even use. What they need is you. They need your time, your attention, your presence in their daily lives. Grace stood up and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to show in the sky. They had been talking for hours, and David realized this was the longest conversation he had had with anyone about something other than business in months. I remember when you first hired me 15 years ago, Grace said, still looking out the window. You were so excited about starting your family. You used to come home early just to help give your daughter her bath when she was a baby. You would read her stories every night before bed. David remembered those days. They felt like a lifetime ago. Back then, his business was smaller, but his life had felt so much richer. He used to look forward to coming home, to spending time with his wife and watching his daughter discover the world around her. What happened to that man? Grace asked, turning back to face him. He got ambitious, David replied sadly. He started believing that being a good provider was the same as being a good husband and father. He convinced himself that working longer Hours and making more money was how you show love to your family. Grace sat back down and reached across the table to touch David's hand. "That man is still there, Mr. David. Tonight, when I told you to be quiet and follow me to the kitchen, I saw him. I saw the man who cares more about his family than anything else in the world." David looked at this woman who had been taking care of his family while he was busy chasing success. Grace had been the one comforting his daughter when she was scared, supporting his wife when she was sick, and holding his household together when he was too distracted to notice it was falling apart. "Grace, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to be the husband and father my family deserves." Grace smiled at him with the same gentle patience she had always shown his daughter when she was learning something new. "You start by showing up, Mr. David. You start by being present. Tomorrow morning you wake up early and have breakfast with your daughter. You go to the hospital and sit with your wife. You listen to them, really listen, and you let them know that they are more important to you than any business deal." David nodded, feeling something shift inside him. For the first time in months, he could see clearly what really mattered. His family needed him, and he was going to be there for them. As the first rays of sunlight began streaming through the kitchen windows, David felt like he was seeing the world with completely new eyes. The night had changed him in ways he never could have imagined when he walked through his front door, just hours earlier. Grace had shown him a mirror that reflected the man he had become, and he didn't like what he saw. But more importantly, she had also shown him the path back to the man he wanted to be. "Grace," David said, standing up from the kitchen table, "I need to call my assistant right now and cancel everything I have scheduled for the next 2 weeks." Grace looked surprised. "2 weeks? Mr. David? Are you sure? I know how important your business is to you." David pulled out his phone and started scrolling through his contacts. "My business will survive without me for 2 weeks. My family might not survive if I don't start putting them first right now." As he waited for his assistant to answer the phone, David looked around his kitchen with fresh eyes. This was where his family ate their meals, where his daughter probably did her homework, where his wife had collapsed just hours earlier. How many important family moments had happened in this room while he was sitting in conference rooms across the city? "Hello, Jennifer. I know it's early, but I need you to cancel every meeting I have for the next 2 weeks. Yes, everything, including the Henderson presentation and the quarterly review meeting. No, this isn't a vacation. This is a family emergency, and it's the most important thing I'll ever do." Grace watched as David spoke firmly but calmly to his assistant, explaining that all his clients would need to wait, that his partners would have to handle things without him, and that nothing was more urgent than being with his family right now. When David hung up the phone, he felt a weight lifting off his shoulders that he hadn't even realized was there. For months, he had been carrying the stress of every business deal, every client meeting, every financial decision. Now, for the first time in years, his calendar was completely clear, and the only thing that mattered was taking care of the people he loved. "Now what?" David asked Grace, feeling nervous about this new territory he was entering. "Now we go wake up your daughter and tell her that Daddy is going to have breakfast with her every morning for the next 2 weeks," Grace said, with the first real smile David had seen from her all night. They walked quietly up the stairs together. David hadn't been upstairs this early in the morning for months. Usually, by the time his family was waking up, he was already at the office or in his car heading to an early meeting. The hallway felt strange and unfamiliar, even though this was his own house. Grace stopped outside his daughter's bedroom door. "She's probably still sleeping, but she's been having bad dreams lately. If she's awake, she might be scared because of what happened last night." David nodded and gently pushed open the door. His daughter's room was decorated with fairy tale characters and stuffed animals. Drawings and school projects covered the walls, and David realized he couldn't remember the last time he had actually looked at any of them. On her nightstand, there was a framed picture of the three of them from last Christmas, back when David still occasionally found time for family activities. His daughter was lying in her small bed, clutching a teddy bear that David recognized as one he had bought her for her 5th birthday. She was awake, staring at the ceiling with the kind of serious expression that no 7-year-old should have to wear. "Sweetheart," David said softly as he sat down on the edge of her bed. His daughter turned her head and her eyes went wide with surprise. "Daddy, you're home. Are you really here?" The way she said it broke David's heart. She sounded shocked to see her own father in her bedroom, as if his presence was some kind of miracle she hadn't dared to hope for. "I'm here, baby girl. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere." His daughter sat up quickly and threw her arms around David's neck. She held on to him so tightly, as if she was afraid he might disappear if she let go. David hugged her back, breathing in the sweet smell of her hair and feeling the warmth of her small body against his chest. "Daddy, is Mommy going to be okay?" she asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Yes, sweetheart. Mommy is going to be fine. The doctors are taking very good care of her, and we're going to go see her later today." "Why didn't you come home when Mommy got sick?" "I was so scared, and I wanted you to be here." David felt tears stinging his eyes again. "I'm sorry, baby. Daddy made a big mistake. I should have been here with you when you were scared. But I promise you, from now on, I'm going to be here when you need me." His daughter pulled back to look at his face, studying his expression with the serious intensity that children use when they're trying to determine if an adult is telling them the truth. "Really? You're not going to work all the time anymore?" "I'm going to work much less, and I'm going to spend much more time with you and Mommy. In fact, would you like to help me make pancakes for breakfast right now?" His daughter's face lit up with a joy so pure and bright that David wondered how he had ever thought any business success could compare to this feeling. The special pancakes with chocolate chips and whipped cream? The most special pancakes ever, David promised. For the next hour, David and his daughter worked together in the kitchen, making the most elaborate pancake breakfast either of them had ever attempted. Grace helped guide them through the process, laughing as David struggled to flip pancakes without breaking them, and cheering when his daughter successfully measured out the perfect amount of chocolate chips. David couldn't remember the last time he had laughed so much or felt so relaxed. His daughter chattered constantly while they cooked, telling him about school, her friends, her favorite books, and a dozen other things that had been happening in her life while he was too busy to listen. "Daddy," she said, as they sat down to eat their pancakes, "this is the best breakfast ever. Can we do this every day?" "Every single day," David promised, and he meant it. After breakfast, David called the hospital to check on his wife's condition. The doctors told him she was stable and awake, and that visiting hours would begin at 10 o'clock. They also mentioned that they had identified the cause of her illness, a treatable condition that would require some medication and lifestyle changes, but nothing life-threatening. At exactly 10 o'clock, David walked into his wife's hospital room carrying a bouquet of flowers and his daughter's latest drawing. His wife looked pale and tired, but when she saw him, her face showed the same surprise his daughter had expressed earlier. "David, what are you doing here? Don't you have that important presentation today?" David sat down in the chair next to her bed and took her hand. "The only important thing I have today is being here with you." I canceled everything. His wife stared at him in shock. You canceled the Henderson presentation? But you've been working on that deal for months. And I almost missed the most important thing that's ever happened in our family. I almost lost you and our daughter because I was too busy chasing success to notice what was really happening at home. David spent the next hour telling his wife everything Grace had shared with him during their long night in the kitchen. He apologized for being absent, for missing the signs of her illness, for not being the partner she deserved. He promised that things were going to be different from now on. I've been thinking, David said. Maybe it's time I brought in a partner to help run the business. Someone who can handle the day-to-day operations while I focus on what really matters. His wife squeezed his hand. Are you sure? Your business means so much to you. My business gave me the means to provide for our family, but it also almost cost me everything that makes life worth living. I want to find a better balance. That afternoon, David, his daughter, and Grace all visited the hospital together. Watching Grace interact with his family, David realized something important. Grace wasn't just an employee who cleaned his house and prepared his meals. She was someone who genuinely loved his family and had been protecting them when he wasn't there to do it himself. Grace, David said as they drove home from the hospital, I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition, Mr. David? I want to offer you a new position, not as a housekeeper, but as our family manager. I want you to help me learn how to be present for my family. I want you to teach me what I've been missing and help me make sure I never miss it again. Grace was quiet for a moment. Mr. David, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think you need a manager to teach you how to love your family. You just need to remember that they're more important than anything else in your life. Then will you stay and help me remember that? Will you help me become the husband and father I should have been all along? Grace smiled at him in the rearview mirror. Mr. David, I've been part of this family for 15 years. I'm not going anywhere. Over the next 2 weeks, David discovered what it meant to truly live with his family instead of just providing for them. He learned about his daughter's favorite subjects in school, her best friends, her dreams about what she wanted to be when she grew up. He helped his wife recover from her illness, not just by being present during her doctor appointments, but by taking over the household responsibilities she had been struggling to manage while feeling sick. Most importantly, David learned that real wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts or business deals. Real wealth was measured in the trust of his daughter's hand in his, the relief in his wife's eyes when she saw him walk through the door, and the knowledge that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The night when Grace had told him to be quiet and follow her to the kitchen had changed everything. It was the night David learned that sometimes the most important conversations happen not in boardrooms or conference calls, but in your own kitchen, with someone who cares enough about your family to tell you the truth you need to hear. David never forgot that lesson, and he never again let his business success come at the cost of his family's happiness.